Hello everybody and welcome to this presentation on what's next for the aged care sector and how to be successful in a changing industry. My name is Heath Shonhan. I'm a partner at Bentley's Queensland and the architects behind CareFactor and innovation program that we've been running. Thank you very much for joining us today. We will spend the next 55 odd minutes going through a little bit of industry context to start with. So spend the first 10 or so minutes setting the scene or the market forces around the current state of play within the aged care sector before diving deep into some of the tools of innovation science that we use to support change within a sector that very much needs change to occur. And finally, round out with a little bit of information on CareFactor, the shirt I'm wearing today, which is the innovation program and the entrepreneurial playground that Bentley's is powering for the sector to help support this change. I'll be using PDF slides today, so I'll be rotating through the slides, and at the end of the session, all attendees will receive both a copy of the slides plus some links to the tools that we'll actually be demonstrating. So we really want this to be a practical session for attendees and listeners, and that's why we'll be sharing with you under very much an open source basis the tools and also the how to use them as well too. So that's the broad agenda for today, and let's dive right in now and actually set the scene before we move into using some of these tools and focusing on how you can actually physically thrive within the sector. So as a very brief industry overview, just as I said, to set the scene, you'll all be aware that government reform is an ongoing signal within this sector, whether it be the Living Longer, Living Better packages, whether it be the Productivity Commission report in 2012, whether it be the very current Royal Commission. The government and the regulators would argue that government reform has increased consumer choice, has improved sustainability, by increasing care contributions and income-tested fees, and also introducing some market-based accommodation payments, and also has improved access by either increasing the accommodation supplement or placing lifetime caps, strengthening eligibility assessments, and also consolidating the aged care programs under one policy control, for argument's sake, the single quality framework. As most industry participants would also know, the sector has a strong underpinning demographic thematic. Back in 2014 and 15, 3.6 million of a portion of population over 65 here in Australia, and the forecasts indicate 8.9 million fast forwarding 40 years. So certainly what investment people say, there's a strong underpinning demographic thematic and a reason to invest in this sector. And if you look at some of the other industry futures, well, Commonwealth expenditure is expected to double over the next 30 years. We expect a more culturally diverse industry. We expect the participants will be very much asset rich, but income poor, with a strong preference to age in place, which is part of the thesis behind government's focus on home care funding, and unfortunately higher divorce rates leading to a change in the accommodation requirements. When we overlay the single quality framework that has been developed and is effective from the 1st of July 2019, the actual providers attending this webinar would be very cognizant of the fact that these 8 standards provide a really strong and focused framework to bridge both across home care as well as into residential aged care, and a lot of focus particularly around standard 8 as an example, around the consumer outcomes, particularly around how well run the organisation is, and partnering and improving the delivery of care and services. That standard has a particular focus on organisational governance, which gets to the heart of today's discussion around innovation. Many providers that we've worked with have added innovation as an agenda item on their standing board or senior executive or management meetings, but are now wondering, well, what does innovation actually mean, and how can I do something a little bit different rather than just incremental innovation focused on improving efficiency or productivity, how can I implement radical innovation to really develop new business models? And then we think about the future, okay? And this is all within the broad context of mapping out the market forces or the influences, the macro trends on our business model. And again, coming from a business model perspective, not a clinical or a care perspective, we're very much looking at business models here. And we're thinking about what are the macro forces that may impact on future business models if we're thinking about how to change and thrive. And so we see continued financial deregulation. This is a fiscal imperative, both for the current Australian government, but also any future Australian governments. Tax collections are significantly lagging government outflows. This was even allowing for future infrastructure spending, and this was pre-COVID as well too. So with the significant amount of money that's come from government for JobKeeper or JobSeeker, this continued financial deregulation imperative will only increase as governments, both current and future, look at how they then start to rebalance the books. The future also involves continued harmonisation across government funding, whether it be home care, RACs, CHSP, out with ACFI, in with some form of future funding, and this all points towards increasing consumer pays with the government safety net for those in our society that are financially and socially disadvantaged, or in regional and remote communities where there is no market, for want of a better word. The regulatory silos, those of you who operate across these silos, residential aged care, home care, and retirement villages, we continue to advocate and see these being replaced by activity centres. So the activity centre of care, irrespective of whether that's delivered in a residential environment, a home environment, or a retirement village. So accommodation as an activity centre, so either your home or in a retirement village or in a residential aged care context, and hotel style services, cleaning, catering, accommodation, supports, daily activity living support. So this breaking down of the regulatory silos that have been driven out of various acts, whether it be the Aged Care Act of '97 or the various state-based Retirement Villages Act, being replaced by these activity centres, and leading providers now look through those acts and no longer segment their business by regulatory function. Instead, they segment their business by activity centre. And one of the final pieces of the future landscape, we can obviously see increasing quality and clinical regulations coming out of the Royal Commission. In what form or format is yet to be determined, but that is one overriding theme that we can see coming out of the future of the sector. So if you want to break this into some very neat summaries, certainly consumer-driven and market-based. Less regulation, likely more regulation around the clinical and the care side of things, and very much market-based and market-driven. There's been an incredible amount of growth in terms of home care service providers, similar to the MDIS in recent years, where the number of providers have exponentially increased, which has arguably led to a greater market if you look at it from a purely economic perspective. Whether or not suppliers increased in areas that need it, such as rural and remote or regional, is another question, and certainly also even the lag around the access to those places still being regulated by government allocation. Briefly touching on the final macro force, which everyone would be conscious of, is the Royal Commission's hearings. Certainly unpacking some of the biggest problems. Arguably, these findings that are being presented are shining a spotlight on the sector, which is great. Those that have been involved in the sector for a very long time, whether they be as providers or advisors such as Bentley's, are conscious that the findings are nothing new. There's a lack of transparency around programs and funding. There's inefficiencies regarding access, particularly waiting times. There's challenges around training of professionals within aged care services. The funding and management of the aged care system really is reliant upon government as the market maker. And when we then look at it from a care recipient perspective, the lack of dignity, the risks associated with physical restraints and medications, the thinking around advanced care planning and the importance of it, but the relatively uncommon practice, and the fact that aged care providers really can help play a role to play here around advanced care planning. Rounding out some of the findings, we'd be conscious that many informal carers feel that there's a lack of available data, and certainly there's a lack of literature around the informal care being provided. And these carers also have reduced health well-being and are facing financial difficulties. These are all key pieces coming out of the Aged Care Royal Commission, and not even touching on the fact that innovative models of care and new ways of caring are absolutely required if we need a sustainable future. When we think then about, okay, what has been done already by the sector, one of the important documents we keep coming back to is the Aged Care Roadmap. We feel that this is a really relevant document which had bipartisan support at the time from both the Labor and Liberal, and also from many providers and peak bodies within the sector. And we feel that this Aged Care Roadmap is as relevant as when it was released 5 odd years ago, and it provides some really important signals as to how the future can be mapped out, irrespective of the current state of play in terms of royal commissions or the form of government that is in power at a particular time. Calling out some specific parts of that roadmap, how do consumers prepare for aged care? The end goal being consumers are proactive and empowered to prepare for their future. How will the workforce be supported? With the end goal being that we've got adaptable workforces that can adjust to meet the needs of older Australians. And then how will quality be achieved? With an end goal being providers must be responsive to increased competition and be supported by regulatory frameworks. We feel that that roadmap is as relevant as ever, and when you focus on the end goal, it provides really important signals then as to how can sustainability be achieved within a sector that desperately needs it. Which, if we use that setting and we go, okay, well, that's great context. So let's then think about how can you innovate in aged care? How can you innovate with that context and those macro forces in mind? There's many practical approaches to investing in innovation. There's developing new products or services or channels or markets or brands or customer experiences, or differentiating your performance or providing strategic alliances, open sourcing of ideas, novel responses, all different practical ways to invest in innovation. If you've added innovation to your board agenda or your senior management agenda, or it's part of your continuous quality framework and continuous improvement plans, these are all practical ways to invest in innovation. The area that we really like to focus on, because we believe that this is a way to provide an absolutely new paradigm shift, is new business models. New business models. So over and above incremental innovation focused on efficiency or selling different products to the same customers, we like to focus on new business models. And we'll share with you now over the course of the next 20 minutes, half an hour, the tools that we use to actually help provide this new business model innovation. But first, a question. What is the difference between a business plan and a business model? Many of you have done business plans, the big wordy documents that sit on shelves and rarely get used. Well, just to be clear, business plans rarely survive that first contact with customers, whereas a business model is an active, living, breathing document. And how do you map out your business model? This is the very first tool that we're going to introduce to you today, the business model canvas. The business model canvas is developed by some Swiss professors, so developed by Alex Ostwalder and Yves Pigneur, Swiss professors, and it's a tool for designing and analysing existing or new business models. It captures how you, as an organisation, create and deliver value, and it consists of 9 building blocks. So we're going to spend the next period of time just looking at this business model canvas, because we really want the sector to really embrace this tool as a way to rapidly support innovation to underpin long-term sustainability. I'm going to spend 3 minutes, and I'm going to share a short video just to introduce the business model canvas to you. So let's just kick back and relax for 3 minutes as the team from Strategyzer introduce business model canvas.
This is the business model canvas. It's just what Beck and Carl need to craft a powerful business model. But if you do the same, let's start at the beginning.
Wonderful team. So I'll just come back now and I'll grab my screen again and then I'll come back online. I've just closed it down for a second as we played that video. So you can see with a business model canvas, it's unlike a business plan in that you're rapidly validating different parts of it. So let's get into and call out some of the different aspects of what was just presented to you just there. And I'll just share my screen again for everybody. So as was just demonstrated on that short video clip by the team at Strategyzer, value proposition is a great place to start. So what value do we deliver to our customers? What customers' problems are we solving? What is the minimum viable product? This then forces us to think about, okay, well, who are we delivering this value to? What customer segments? Well, who are our most important customers? What are the archetypes of those customers? We then start to get into the channels. So how do we then reach those customers? Is it online? Is it via existing GPs? Is it via channel partners? And then what types of relationships do we have with those customers? How do we get them? How do we retain them? All of that is around the value and the customer proposition. And if you want to think about it in a slightly different way, that's the desirability aspects of your business model. If you then think, okay, well, what types of resources do I need to deliver that value proposition on the left-hand side of the canvas? What types of activities, distribution channels, customer relationships do I need to go through to actually deliver that value proposition to our customers? And then who are our partners? Do we need technology people? Do we need universities? Do we need aged care providers? Do we need GP clinics? Who are our partners to actually deliver those activities and resources? All of that is around the feasibility aspects of our business model. And that has cost implications on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side has revenue implications. Revenue less costs leads to the viability aspects of your business model. So you can very quickly see that on one page, it maps out every part of what you otherwise put through a business plan, but you get it onto one page. Each component of this contains a series of hypotheses that you will need to test, evaluate, and refine. I'll go into that a little bit more in a second in terms of how you actually test and refine them. But in the words of the author of the business model canvas, Alex Ostwalder, it really helps you understand the true value proposition of an idea and moves you beyond the actual thinking aspects and down into the writing. It helps you then plan validation tests. It helps you brainstorm market disruption activities, all without spending a cent. Some argue that this is actually your first minimum viable product. So how do we use it? Each of these parts of your business model, when you map it out, contains a series of hypotheses that need testing. And when we're talking about testing, we're talking about empirical testing, so getting out of the building and actually testing the plan, versus rhetorical reasoning, i.e. the perfect pursuit of a perfect plan. So keep calm and test the hypothesis is a big part of what we advocate. How do we use this tool? Bentley, you're giving us this tool. It's great. Thank you very much for the tool. How do we actually use it? Right, there's a four-step process here that we talk about. Firstly, we need to build and visualize. Secondly, we need to prototype. Thirdly, we need to test and learn. And finally, we need to implement. And we go through a build, measure, learn loop on a continuous basis with this business model canvas. Just repeating, value propositions, channels, customer segments, customer relationships is all around the desirability aspects of your business model. On the back of house then, partners, activities and resources all around the feasibility, and then the viability is revenue less expenses. Let's use an example. Out of the US, a company called Lift Hero. So Lift Hero, their value proposition was around providing pre-scheduled door-to-door transport to medical appointments. They provide real-time reporting and friendly faces, particularly relevant in a social isolation context such as the moment, or more generally, as many of your care recipients, whether it be home care or in retirement villages, find themselves looking for that social interaction. So friendly faces provide that. Who are their customer segments? Well, their research indicated that their first customer is actually the oldest daughter of the senior who has trouble driving. Then the actual seniors living centres, so aged care, home care, retirement living centres, and then the clinics, the hospitals, the insurance companies. How did they find these customers? By direct marketing to families, by direct marketing to the discharge planners in the clinics. What type of relationship did they have with these customers? Well, certainly there was a limited number of drivers per senior, so that they were building up this friendly faces value proposition. They provided a rating system, not unlike Uber, and there was very much a segment-specific focus. So unlike Uber, which was very much open slather, it was very much segment-specific, elderly seniors. That's the desirability. On the The feasibility side, well, the resources, they needed drivers, they needed a technical team, and they needed seed money for the initial insurance and hiring. The activities that Lift Hero complete, medical related rides, they were completing platform development for the underlying platform, and sales and support. Their key partners were the auto insurance providers, given that they needed to be able to provide the auto insurance to the drivers, the EMT schools and nursing programs, and then the site hosting, which started off initially as Heroku, then Rackspace and SoftLayer. They needed a payments platform, and they needed location, and they needed text. This front of house activity resulted in the revenue streams being a payment through the app, dollar per hour and an amount per mile, and subscriptions at discounted rates. And then on the cost side of the structure, they had insurance costs, driver's compensation, and the customer development team. So a very great example, very pertinent example of innovation directly developing a new business model to support pre-scheduled door-to-door transportation. Some hot tips. Focus on the model, not just on the product or the technology or the service. A great idea needs a great business model. Second hot tip, don't fall in love with your first models. We suggest that you use sticky notes and don't write directly onto the business model canvas. So we would suggest that when we send you the business model canvas, that you print it off, ideally in A3, grab a deck of sticky notes, ideally the small ones, and write only 2 to 4 words at most on each sticky note. This helps you change your thinking, keep your thinking condensed. It prevents you from writing large theses on each piece of sticky note. And also, more importantly, you can prioritize, even change around your model. It helps you iterate rapidly. It helps you test your model early by using these sticky notes. And the final tip, which we're really going to focus on for the rest of the session, is around incrementally testing and proving up each part of your building block within the 9 parts of the canvas. So just repeating, don't fall in love with your first model. Just because you've got your idea down, which is great, it's important to rapidly test and iterate that. And we're going to give you some tools as to how you can do that in a second. But then also, as I said before, use sticky notes. Write 2 to 4 words at most on the actual sticky notes. Don't write directly onto the canvas, because your words then become hard-coded and you might want to change them, move them around. And that'll enable you to iterate and test rapidly. Here's a scorecard to use as well too. So when you've actually developed, and we'll share the scorecard with you, but when you've developed your canvas, you may then want to actually go, okay, well, you know what, let's give ourselves a score as to how well we've gone here. And I'll zoom in and just focus a little bit on different aspects of this. So first of all, if you're internally innovating within a corporate environment, one of your first tests will be around strategic fit. So is our idea or a project, is it aligned with our corporate identity? Is it aligned with our direction, culture, and brand image? If there's no alignment or little alignment, then your innovation project may well be doomed to failure from the outset. Whereas if there's very strong alignment, continue to proceed. Is it aligned with your company's innovation guidance? Again, little alignment, your project will be really challenged. If you've got strong alignment, then a good tick to move forward. And then finally, from a strategic fit perspective, do we have leadership support? Is our idea or project supported by at least one key sponsor who can help make it reality? Yes or no? Okay, once you've moved past the strategic fit or the macro perspective, then you start to think about the opportunity. Do we understand the financial potential of our idea? Is it a big idea with really strong potential, or is it a real niche or a micro opportunity? After you've thought about the macro pieces, then we get into risk reduction. And using the strategizer tools, it's all around reducing risk, because very early on in the business model canvas and your business model thinking in your innovation journey, risk is significant. You have a whole heap of guesses around customer desirability, feasibility, and viability. You haven't tested any of this, so your biggest goal at this point in time is around rate of learning, to adopt a lean startup methodology and thinking. It's around rate of learning. And what you're doing here is you're reducing risk so that you can then increase the bet size that you make as you have higher degrees of evidence and confidence. We like to start with desirability, because if there's no desirability, you can have the shiniest, best kits, you know, with the right resources and activities and partners. But if you don't have any customers that see value in your proposition, and you can't get to those customers, then it's pointless having the shiniest piece of technology. So when we're focusing on desirability, start with your customer segments. Do we have the right customer segments? Do we understand what the jobs, the pains and the gains of those customers are? And do they align to our value proposition? Does our value proposition actually resonate then with our customers? It might be great to have something that is you think will solve a problem, but if it's not going to solve a problem, reduce pain or create a gain for your customers, then it's not a true value proposition that is actually going to be successful or actually rate highly. And then once you've satisfied yourself that you've got the customer segments and they do actually have pains and gains and jobs to be done that align with your value proposition, do you know how to find those customers? Have we found the best channels to get to those customers? And then do we have the right relationships to retain those customers and repeatedly earn from them? So some innovation commentators call this sticky customers. Focusing on desirability, presuming you've got very strong evidence and very strong confidence, or you can design some tests to obtain that evidence and confidence, then moves you into the feasibility aspects of your business model. Do we have the right technologies and resources to create our value proposition? Have we the right capabilities? Do we know what activities we need to do? What are the most critical ones to launch our value proposition immediately? And have we got the right partners who are willing to work with us to create and deliver our value proposition? This is the back of house aspects of your business model. So as I said before, working through these 9 building blocks and critically assessing what level of evidence and what confidence do we have across the feasibility aspects. Moving to the viability, do we know how much our customers are then willing to pay us and how they will pay for the desirability aspects? And then on the cost side of it, or the back of house, do we know the cost for creating and delivering this value proposition? What evidence do we have around this? What degree of confidence do we have? And then as I started the presentation today, understanding the market forces. So the industry forces, the market, the trends, the macroeconomic forces. So here we're talking about competitors and emerging players. We're talking about market shifts, such as the industry frameworks that I was talking about before. We're talking about trends such as technology, regulatory, cultural, or societal trends. As an example, we've seen a massive shift towards digital first and e-commerce over the last few months as we've had to radically change the way that we work, the way that we engage in society, the rise of Zoom, the rise of online networking. We've had 4 years of e-commerce adoption in 3 months, as an example. These trends around technology first and cultural particularly washing through as baby boomers demand a different level of service within aged care, or a different level of service even for their parents within aged care, whereas the current cohort of say, residential aged care recipients very much come from a more frugal and parsimonious thinking and are happy to have food and don't need the choices that, or demand the choices that the baby boomers have become accustomed to. And then the macroeconomic forces and the infrastructure trends that we mentioned before. So undoubtedly we're going to have a shift in terms of government funding of this sector, because the amount of money coming in from the taxpayers is massively less than what is going out at this point in time. So this tool provides a great framework to critically assess your innovation project. Okay, I mentioned before around your business model canvas. As you map it out, and as Lift Hero mapped out their canvas at this point in time, it's just a series of guesses. a series of guesses. You've got a series of hypotheses here. We believe, a whole range of we believes across the 9 building blocks of your business model canvas. When we define an hypothesis, we very much replicate the definition that the strategizer team use, which is around a hypothesis is an assumption that is testable, precise, and discrete. And so again, rather than replicate the wheel, here's 2 great tools that the team from Strategizer have put out that we absolutely use through the CareFactor program and through all of our innovation projects that we work with our clients on around developing new forms of business models and this overall piece of innovation science, the learning card and the test card. So starting off with the test, as I said before, you've got 9 building blocks containing a whole range of hypotheses. And those hypotheses are best framed within the concept of we believe that, and so then we need to test that hypothesis. So to verify that, we will, and remember within testing, there's both the cost as well as reliability. Different types of testing such as split A/B or landing pages or even surveys provide varying levels of reliability, and the team from Strategizer have a whole book on testing of business ideas and even different types of patterns to test different types of business models that you're approaching, whether it be B2B, B2C. They range from online ads through to product boxes, feature statements. If you're going to develop a test, you then want to be able to measure. As I said before, it's testable and it's precise and it's discrete. And so we're going to measure responses, we're going to measure feedback, we're going to measure click-throughs. And then you need some criteria around your hypothesis. So again, getting back to scientific method, we are right if 8 out of 10 click on, do this, etc. That's the test card. To couple that, then we want to actually learn from our testing, and so we restate our hypothesis. We believed that people will take up our idea. We observed that 7 out of 10 people clicked buy, as an example, and from that we learned that 70% of the market is actually interested in our product based on our test size. Therefore, we will test, observe, whatever our action is from that. So we're looking at hypothesis, what we observed, what are the insights and the learnings from that observation, and now what decisions and actions are we going to take? As you can see, this is putting some real scientific method into the process of business model development, and it's rapidly different from business model planning. You know, business plans are very much around developing up SWOT analysis and competitors and market research, and very little testing, very little learning. We're really trying to use a lean mindset here, using some of the lean startup methodologies to focus on rapid iteration of your business model to reduce risks, increase evidence, and increase confidence. So let's look at Lift Hero. So back to Lift Hero as a business model. Remember, value proposition being pre-scheduled door-to-door transportation, real-time reporting, customers being the oldest daughter, then the seniors living centre such as retirement living, then the clinics and hospitals. They're finding these customers through direct marketing. They have a strong focus on the aged care, elder care, seniors living segments with a rating system, so it's trusted. And they need resources such as drivers and tech teams and partners. So their business model, let's look at some hypotheses that these folk had. So we like to focus on desirability, and we like to focus on because that's where we see most of the risk in an early stage business model. And so a desirability test, as an example, we believe that door-to-door service will free up 25% of time in the week for the primary carer, for example, the eldest child or the eldest daughter. Secondary hypothesis might be that Lift Hero's same driver policy will generate positive customer experience and result in X number of recurring bookings per month. And another hypothesis around their desirability would have been very much that the primary carer will pay an amount of money per hour for each service delivered, and per kilometre as well too. So using that type of testing, we believe that door-to-door service will free up time. To verify this, we will conduct an online or telephone survey targeted at that primary carer. So surveys being very much a low test cost, but also low level of reliability, because it's just a perception or a belief survey. Surveys are very low levels of reliability. It's a useful quick test, but it's certainly nowhere near the level of the reliability that comes about by actually physically people paying for something. Under this desirability test, we're going to measure the weekly travel time and the kilometres that they travel with a sample size of 100. Again, very quick, we're just asking them how much they're travelling. And we are right if we believe that the primary carer can regain 25% of their normal travel time by using Lift Hero. So a practical example of how you can design a test to focus on a key part of your business model being desirability. How do you do this? Well, you very much run this test in accordance with your hypothesis. You then learn and adjust your value proposition. Remember, when you're testing, then it's not all about success. Failures actually provide really critical information. And so this informs when and where you should actually pivot your business model. And then you keep going and testing your idea until it's viable and the business model is validated. If you want to look at this in a different way, as I mentioned before, you've developed up your business model, okay? So let's just say you're sitting in front of your business model canvas after you finish this workshop, and you've got an idea and you've rapidly sketched it out with your sticky notes on your A3 printed business model, and you've put in your value proposition, you put in your customers, your channels, the relationships, the desirability aspects that I mentioned before. The next step is to then take that same sticky note and start to map out your hypothesis all around the outside of your canvas. So what are my key guesses around the customers and the value proposition? It might be you've got guesses around the channels. It might be guesses around who your customers, your primary customers are. It might be guesses around how much your customers are willing to pay. The really important part is to do this rapidly. Absolutely, you will not get it right the first time. It will take several iterations, but the agile approach is to get your ideas down on paper so you can rapidly then map out your hypothesis and tests. What you then do is you take those sticky notes, those guesses you've got around, and what we want to do is we then want to map these, if you want to map out your hypothesis on a simple X and Y axis. And on the X axis, we're using labels of have evidence or no evidence, okay? So using the language that I had before, if we've got evidence, that's great, that's actually really good. And then similarly, on the Y axis, we're looking at how important or unimportant. And the question here is we're asking ourselves which hypothesis, if proven wrong, will cause our business idea to fail. This mapping out will actually help focus your attention then. So to use those test cards and those learning cards, you really want to focus on the top right quadrant. Those guesses or hypotheses around your business model that are most important, but you have no evidence for. So you can put aside those that are important, but you've got evidence at this point in time because you've got evidence. We feel comfortable about those. We know they're important, but we've got some evidence. That might be, we've got evidence around the customers, or it might be evidence around the price they're willing to pay or the value proposition. We put aside those where we've got evidence but are unimportant to us because they're not critical in terms of our business model. And similarly, we put aside those that are unimportant, that we've got no evidence, because you've got a limited amount of time. We're adopting a lean startup approach here. And so we really want to focus our attention on those big guesses or hypotheses, which, if proven wrong, will cause our business to fail. This will help us determine where we need to spend our time and which is the most important. And so that's where you then pull out those testing cards that we just introduced to you before. The second of the two tools that we're introducing to you today. The first one being the business model canvas, the second one being those test and learning cards. And you focus your attention on those, because if they're proven wrong, your business idea is going to fail. Just want to give you an example then within an aged care context. So one of the ideas that we've been working up is the concept of aged care Airbnb. And so here we've actually mapped out a double-sided business model. So to get a little bit technical, we've actually got two business models on the one canvas. Green being the business model that we'd be offering to residential aged care providers, and yellow being the business model that we'd be offering to care recipients. And so under the concept, everyone would be familiar with Airbnb. Well, what we're hypothesizing and proposing here is aged care Airbnb. For the value proposition to consumers is in yellow, and the value proposition to aged care providers is in green. Again, using sticky notes. So as you can see, I've kept the words limited. So to quickly skip through what the business model might be for aged care Airbnb for consumers, the value proposition is to maximize the care for the frail. The key customer segments will be the sons and the daughters of the elderly in our community, then the elderly. The way that we might find them might be via the web, it might be via some of the industry groups such as COTA, it might be some of the clubs, whether it be golf clubs or whether it be retirement villages, or it might be GPs and hospitals. We're going to have a trusting and a caring relationship. All of that desirability will result in a fee per placement or a fee per advertising. Remember, these are just all guesses at this point in time. This doesn't exist. This is something we're working up at this point. To the resources we'll need a tech platform. We'll need to develop brand. We'll have sales and marketing channels. In terms of activities, we need online payments. We need customer acquisition. Our key partners would then be aged care service providers, physically the accommodation service providers. We may well have university to validate the model, and we may well have devices in terms of a tech-led platform. That results in costs such as tech development, sales and marketing, and general and admin. If we then overlay the business model in terms of what that might look like for aged care providers, what we're offering up as a value proposition is to utilize surplus aged care capacity. Our customers here are residential aged care providers and possibly even retirement village providers, possibly even the hospital and health services or the local health networks around the state. How do we find them? Again, via the web, maybe via My Aged Care, maybe via the peak bodies. The relationships would be very much self-service and transactional. So aged care provider would log in and upload their rooms in terms of availability, similar to what Airbnb hosts do currently. This would require money in terms of platform development. It would require technology developers under resources. The activities require tech development, customer acquisition being the aged care providers, as well as photos and artwork, partnerships, potentially software companies, government, and possibly even Amazon as a tech stack provider, resulting in technology costs. We may need to buy the bed per night from the aged care provider. We may not. Airbnb certainly doesn't buy the bed, it just acts as the interface. And we certainly would need some form of payments gateway or banking costs. That's just an example of really mapping out a quick business model. As you can see, there's a whole heap of guesses around this. The guesses, when we're thinking about the desirability, is that sons and the daughters of elderly, or even the elderly themselves, would want some level of respite. If we think about that in today's climate, then there's a very low level of potential for that because of the current lockdown within aged care and the negative brand perceptions that is currently going on. So whereas if we were to test the desirability in terms of residential aged care providers, we feel confident that there's occupancy and surplus capacity that those providers would be willing to share under this type of model. The types of tests that we would do, we would certainly need to focus very much then on the desirability of the sons and the daughters of the elderly to go into some form of respite to maximize the care for their frail loved ones, as opposed to going into a hospital type of environment. Again, a really quick example of mapping out a business model canvas, whole heap of ideas that need to be tested. As I said, a range of hypotheses that would need to be worked through. Hopefully, we've given you two key tools there. Number one being a business model canvas, and two being those test and learning cards. And then a third one, just to share with you, is that innovation project scorecard. We're going to share these with participants. They're available online. For the attendees and the viewers of this webinar, we also encourage you to think about then how you actually successfully invest in innovation. Here at Bentley's, we've been working for many years within the sector, and similarly, we've been working for many years outside of the sector with high growth startups and scale-ups, entrepreneurs at large, working across a whole range of sectors. And so, how do we successfully invest in innovation? We've developed a program and a platform called CareFactor, the shirt that I'm wearing today. And CareFactor is really this entrepreneurial playground. So in terms of, you may be an aged care provider looking for first access to innovation. You may be a startup or a researcher or an entrepreneur within an aged care provider looking to bring a big idea to market. CareFactor is for both of you. CareFactor helps aged care providers access curated innovation, the best of the best that currently exists across the sector. And similarly for the startups, the researchers or the entrepreneurs, it helps you provide and use these tools, but also gives you direct access to providers to help rapidly validate your product market fit and make sure that you're not creating anything that the sector doesn't want or need. So as I mentioned before, CareFactor is an entrepreneurial playground for aged care. Very specifically at the heart of CareFactor, it's a virtual incubator. This is the second year of running. We piloted the program in 2019. It's a range of workshops and events. It's focused around supporting and skilling entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs, not only commercial, focus on their ideas, but also practically commercialize it to support successful aging. It's not a piece of innovation theatre. These tools are open source. What we help you do is actually use the tools, refine them to deliver quality outcomes for our aged care community in Australia. 2019 was our first pilot. The program last year consisted of a 3-day masterclass, an 8-week mentoring program, a pitch day, all resulting in a 12-week incubator. We had 10 teams from around the countryside, 4 in Queensland, 3 in New South Wales, 2 in Victoria, and 1 in Tasmania. 9 of them were startups, either entrepreneurs or academia, and 1 of them was actually a spin-out from an aged care provider looking to create new revenue streams outside of traditional forms of government subsidies or resident fees. The 3-day workshop, in terms of numbers, we had 2 facilitators, 1 entrepreneur in residence, 9 sponsor organisations, organisations like AXA, Westpac, Oz Industry, Austrade, the Queensland government, all great sponsors, Brisbane Marketing, Brisbane City Council. That 3-day workshop, we had guest speakers such as Pat Sparrow, the CEO of AXA, provided a great industry snapshot. We had mentors and guest speakers such as Chris Gray, the founder of iCare, Lorraine Pye-Finch, the founder of Best Practice Software, come along and give the teams practical insights as to how to rapidly validate. The 8 weeks of mentoring, we utilised the expertise of Lou Jury, the entrepreneur in residence at Steve Baxter's River City Labs and Telstra's River City Labs, all around how to pitch, rapidly pushing the teams so that they weren't just focused on the feasibility aspects, but really focused on the desirability aspects of their business model, all resulting in a pitch day. The River City, the entrepreneurial precinct put on by the Queensland government, where we had over 150 attendees from providers, government, and academia, all teams pitching for 4 minutes with 2 minutes of Q&A. So if you're a startup, what does CareFactor actually provide? It provides intensive learning. Their workshops are hands-on. The tools we use are best practice. It's focused on rapid learning by doing. It's not just innovation theatre. We provide access to funding sources, so you learn how to pitch. You hear from finance specialists, seed funds, venture capitalists. Indeed, the pitch day winner last year, Halo, has gone on to receive venture capital funding. We provide tailored mentoring, the one-on-one expert mentoring. Entrepreneurs and residents all provide this weekly check-in. We provide exclusive networks, so access to customers, and we provide a foot in the door. So rather than just being one of many, the program shows that you've done due diligence on your business model and your commercialization pathway, and it's de-risking investment for future investment. We use the science of innovation as our methodologies. We presented and used one of the tools today, the business model canvas and the testing and the learning cards. We also help teams actually hack their business model using business model patterns, again, out of the University of St. Gallen. And we really use this build, measure, learn loop. So we start with a business model, we ideate, we prototype it using the business model canvas. We assess whether it's actually got the product market fit by actually developing hypotheses, testing those hypotheses, designing experiments, learning from those experiments, and then making a call. Do we pivot, or do we continue to ideate, prototype, assess, hypothesis? This is the build, measure, learn loop that we have adopted from Alex Ostwalder and David Bland's testing business model ideas theory, and don't need to take our word from it. The teams really had some great feedback. So a couple of the teams had been through other incubators and accelerators, and they really focused on how the program provided connections to customers. The mentors were dynamic. It forced new pathways of thought. We worked through speed dating. We worked through quality of presenters. So I'll pause on the final two slides because I'm 1 minute over time, but there's a QR code here if you wanted to pick your phone up and scan if you've got the next big idea in aged care. Either reply now, go to bentleys.com.au/CareFactor, or in the current environment, many of you would be used to just getting out your mobile phone and opening up the camera and scanning the QR code there. That will take you directly to the application process. If you've got the next big idea in aged care, we encourage you to apply now. There's another week and a half for applications before they close. There's lots of great interest. Entrants will be competitively assessed. And similarly, final QR code, if you're the next, if you're an aged care provider looking for a front row seat to industry innovation and you want to be part of the provider pool, again, here's the QR code to scan, or again, go to bentleys.com.au/CareFactor. I'm conscious of time, everybody, but just a very quick recap. Over the course of the last hour, we provided you with some of the industry frameworks and our lens on the macro forces and the market thematics that are shaping and really driving the need for innovation within the sector. We've all heard about things like Royal Commission and productivity commissions and Living Longer, Living Better reforms. Those provide the urgency for change. The incumbent environment that we find ourselves within here in Australia and globally around COVID as a pandemic has really focused our attention on the absolute relevance of changing, particularly as it impacts parts of society that are most vulnerable. We then provided you with 3 key tools. First being the business model canvas. We'll share that with you. It's a great way to be able to pick up a tool, rapidly translate your idea into reality without going through the process of cumbersome business model plans. We then provided you with the testing and the learning cards, remembering that your business model canvas just contains a whole heap of hypotheses, risks that need to be tested, and as you increase your evidence and your learnings, it then enables you to increase your bet size around your investment in the innovation project. And then the third tool we provided you with was an innovation scorecard so that you can continue to assess where you're at in your innovation journey. And then the final piece we provided you just then was a practical way to participate within innovation in the aged care sector via the CareFactor program, powered by Bentleys and supported by great organisations such as Telstra Health and many others. And if you're interested in being a part of that program and you've got a great idea that you want to move through a focused framework, we've provided you with the bentleys.com.au/CareFactor website. If you're a team, and similarly, if you're an aged care provider looking to have a front row seat to these great ideas coming through, such as Churches of Christ last year, stumbled across Halo, and are now implementing Halo as a solution to engage with their home care recipients all around their diverse service provision across Queensland. That's the opportunity here for providers, and we've provided you with that framework by CareFactor. We encourage you to apply sooner rather than later. That's today's session. Thank you very much for your time, for your interest. These slides will be available to everybody. And thank you, and have a good day.